This video will get you hooked on making hooks. So the first pewter coat hook that I made was sort of done as an experiment because pewter does not work harden, so I wasn't sure about how well the pewter hook would actually function. And as it turns out, with the fold forming process, it gains a lot of structural strength and works really well. We even installed them in our bathrooms and use them every day. We're very happy with them. So for this video, what I would recommend is going with a slightly thicker pewter sheet. So the blank that I'll be working with is 1.6 millimeters. And the blank to start with is 1.5 inches wide by 7 inches long. And for fold forming, if you're not familiar with it, it's a process where you use a cross-peen hammer, and by hammering on part of the folded metal, it expands it and causes it to curve in the opposite direction, which you'll see. So with the blank, you start with this, then you fold it in half, and by cutting a diagonal to it, that will help the curvature down towards the end and have a nice smooth taper. So what I would recommend for this designer's coat hook is leaving about 3/4 of an inch for the mounting plate to the wall, and then about 4 or 4.25 inches where you're hammering on this edge that'll cause it to curve that way and be the area that opens up. And then the last 2 inches of it will curve the opposite direction and become the part that curves back around. So depending on what you're going to hang on the hook, it can either rest on the folded part of the metal there, or let's say it's a hat or something like that, could rest on the spine here. And we'll go through that process of fold forming this piece. So one of the great things about fold forming pewter is that it doesn't work harden, so you don't have to stop, anneal it, pickle it, clean it, and continue going. You can just work start to finish on the fold form piece and take it as far as you like to. So again, if you're not familiar with fold forming, there's a whole book. Charles Luton Brain has an amazing book that outlines all these different approaches to it, and this is really just a very basic approach. What you're doing, like I said, is going with a cross-peen hammer and spreading the metal on 1/2 of the fold. So then what that'll cause is the metal to stretch out and start forcing a curve, and this side of the metal to contract based on where you're hitting. And you'll see that starting to develop as we get going. And you can just decide the different lengths, and I went over the lengths that I think are best for this particular coat hook design. You can hammer on the horn of an anvil, which will help with the curvature of the metal a little bit. You can certainly hammer on the flat of an anvil or a bench block or something as well, but it'll just take a little bit more hammering. I do like to start with the 1.6 thicker sheet of pewter because there is a fair amount of thinning that happens, and you don't want to start getting cracks or anything in your metal. So here we go. And you can see a small amount of curvature starting to happen, and I'll start working the other way for the end. And I like to flip on both sides so it starts thinning and bending evenly. And you can see with the thinner part starting to get some curvature. And then you want to make sure that you keep straight which side of the metal you're hammering on to keep getting it curving in the direction you want to. It's important to, if you're going to be doing a lot of hammering, to be set up and be ergonomic with your setup. You can see the metal starting to curve. It will get a twist to it as well. between passes, it's good to kind of flatten things out a little bit. And you can see just from the hammering starting to get a little bit of curvature of the piece. And so we'll just keep pushing that forward. Okay, so this is probably as far as you need to take the piece through the fold forming process. You can see the curvature of the bottom of the hook and then the head of the hook curving back in on itself. It will tighten up a little bit as it opens, and you'll see. Before I do that, there's a couple other things that I do to it. One is I use a burnisher, which is just a polished piece of steel, to go over the surface that just gives it a nice subtle little glint. And then I also like to go in with a ball peen hammer and upset the edges of the metal so that none of them are sharp from the cross peen or anything like that, but it just kind of rounds it off and gives it a nice finished feel to it. If you're not familiar with fold forming, what you need to do next is open up the fold and you'll start seeing it take the volume. And if you want to do a lot of it, it's good to modify a tool so that it doesn't have any sharp corners or anything like that. But a screwdriver with smooth surfaces will do fine for it if you just want to try this out once or something like that. So you just start at the end, and carefully you want to make sure that you have gloves for this. You want to just start going in and opening up the form. You work the screwdriver down to the fold and just gently bend apart, working your way down the full form, and you can adjust its final shape later. You just want to start opening it up here. You want to be sure that and careful that the corners of the screwdriver don't poke through your hammered metal, unless that's a design feature that you want to do regular on purpose. But you can see it starting to open up. And maybe you can see that little burnished or glinting on the edge of the metal. Just working on down. And then if I did it right, the end of this should open up and just kind of tuck into it. But having a nice little volume to your fold form gives the pewter the structural strength, and also I think is a nice aesthetic look to the overall design. So again, just working into the fold, opening up, and you can see the curvature kind of tightening up a little bit. Kind of have to plan ahead as you're deciding when to stop hammering on your piece. And with pewter working, you might want to review our video, but you want to make sure that you don't have any cross-contamination if you're going to be working with silver or copper or something like that. So any tools that aren't exclusively pewter, I would recommend, like this anvil and everything, cleaning off once you're done. And then for it to be a hook, really want to open this up completely. So you can kind of bend to the side there and just hammer that open a bit. Maybe I need to get in with the parallel jaw pliers a little bit. And just open it up on the horn of the anvil a little bit. And you'll be able to twist this back as you need. And then for the final design, you can decide what final shape you'll like here that will be placed against the wall. So generally I like to cut this off, kind of round it over, and then maybe go in with a ball peen and have a slightly different kind of hammer textured having here. If you do get a little bit of splitting against the fold of the metal, you could work that into a design, have it curve back down into that area to remove it, or you can even just kind of cut around all of that. And then in the final placement of the hook, you can sort of even out the folds. I use parallel jaw pliers quite a bit, so you can see some of the different waves just from the initial opening up, and you can kind of work those back into a more uniform appearance. You want to just make sure that you don't have any kinks in there, so you have a nice smooth flowing piece. And except for maybe drilling or punching those holes and some final metal finishing, hammer textures, things like that, we're almost done. But each one's going to end up just a little bit different based on your hammering technique of it. So give it a try. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you can hear from me when I post future videos. Thanks for stopping by.